We have just had the Ashes of Creation Fighter Showcase stream, and I must confess it is looking pretty damn exceptional. And for me personally, it's almost bordering perfection. Now, the actual live stream that they did was about 2 hours and 40 minutes. The video section of the fighter was over 1 hour and 30 minutes long. Don't worry, I'm not going to keep you that long. So what they're doing is they're showing the fighter class, and they were doing this with the Renkai, which is basically orcs. My initial thought on the Renkai was that it's not the prettiest thing, but actually I settled into it. I didn't mind the appearance of the Renkai. This was again set in the Riverlands. Now, the fighter class is going to feature primarily something called momentum, which is effectively the class energy system that you build up and then you spend. This adds an extra bar. In the top left, you have your health, your mana, and then you have momentum. They also showed off the skill tree, which it may not be presented in the best form, but I have to say I really sort of liked its almost non-linear appearance. And then they start getting into the abilities themselves, and I like pretty much all of them. The first one they show off is Blitz, which is pretty much a charge. It's a gap closer. This actually will give you some momentum as well. And what was funny is if you sort of like jump up and use it, you effectively sort of fly across the map. It might look a little bit weird from an outsider point of view, but it really looked very fun when Steven was using it. I would be very curious how this is designed to work if somebody's further on the ledge. Will you run up the ledge? Do you have to jump to get over the ledge? I'm sort of curious how that will work, but it looked really fun. Then they spoke about two abilities that were sort of like AoE that generated resources. You had Cleave, which is obviously just sort of like a swiping attack, but it does generate the momentum. You also have Overpower, which is sort of the same thing, except it's a single target, but it does generate momentum. Both abilities looking pretty nice. They showed off Maim, which is a cone AoE, and if you actually spec into it, it has like a projectile. Both versions of this looked pretty sensational. I really liked both of them. Maim to me sort of suggests a snare, but okay, it doesn't really matter too much, I guess. They then show off Battle Cry. Now, Battle Cry is a little bit weird to show off because apparently it doesn't actually do damage, but it does show like some effects. It does some effects on the enemies. It will rile your party. It will apply Shaken on the enemies, and it does generate that combat momentum per ally that is around you. Shaken, by the way, is a debuff on the enemy that gives them a chance to trip when they take damage. Or be tripped, I should say, I guess. There is also Whirlwind, which is your classic spin to win. It's an AoE that ramps up in speed as you hold it, and if you spec into this one, it performs an upward swing, and that will do damage. It's spin to win, but you can move while you're doing this ability. What I liked so far about the showcase is that the enemies were sort of reacting to the hit. I know, I think in the previous updates, like when they did the melee update, that wasn't the case. I don't know when that was actually introduced, but it sort of looked like they were reacting in this one. And overall, the movement of the abilities I really liked. There was something in the talent tree where you could sort of wound an enemy and then make it do anti-heal. And I like the fact that they were building that into the fighter's kit. They also mentioned in the skill tree, this was maybe how the augments would work. I think they're basically setting up the foundation for augments. So when you do class augments, they're going to allow you to change abilities in specific ways. And I think it's going to sort of function similar to the class skill tree. They showed off Cataclysm as an ability, which was a huge, big AoE. And this was one of the coolest abilities. Like, it just visually looked very, very nice. Next, they showed off Rupture, which was a single target attack, and it did like a debuff. And basically, as it builds, the enemy gets more wounded, and that basically does more damage over time. And at the end of it, I think it does like a big bit of damage. Now, the effect on this one, if I'm honest, I felt was a little bit too much. I think Steven sort of probably agreed with that, the way that he was speaking. But there's like this trail of blood that's sort of like bursting out of the enemy. Yeah, and visually that was obviously, you know, quite strong. Ashes of Creation's visuals overall, I think personally are quite nice. The spell effects are mostly nice. There might be a little bit too many of them, and they might be a little bit too bright and too bold. But you know what? I think the combat actually looks pretty nice. They then show off Crippling Blow, which is sort of what I thought Maim might be. It's a single target slow, snare, you know, you're going to slow the enemy down. And Steven was showing off the combination that if you blitz and then you go into Crippling Blow, you know, it allows you to actually get your damage off. They then show off Lethal Blow, which is an execute. Basically, the less health they have, the more damage you can expect these to do. However, you're always rolling the dice if it comes to PvP because you actually won't know how much health the enemy has. But But one key thing about this ability, which I've never seen before, but I'm not necessarily going to call super unique, is that it actually has an overkill. So if you do a big, massive amount of damage and you do an overkill, typically that would be wasted. Here, it's actually going to give you like some health and some mana. So there's actually sort of a bit of a point to doing that big number at the end. And then they sort of show off some abilities that you get from the skill tree. One of them is Blood Fusion, which basically gives you lifesteal for an X amount of time. And yeah, that looks good. Look like very fitting for the fighter. They also show off the Lunging Assault, which is spending some of your momentum. So a lot of the other abilities are either creating momentum or not really using it at all. Lunging Assault is a little dash forward that does spend momentum. Now this one was almost so small that it's not really noticeable. It's about sort of repositioning yourself in an action sort of fight. If you want more distance, well, the next ability is what you want to be looking at, and that is Leap Strike, which basically is Leaping Strike from World of Warcraft as far as I can tell. You have a cursor with a circle on it, you pick that wherever you want it, and then you do a big cool looking jump to that point. You can use this as a gap closer or an opener, and he did try and show it so that if you jump on a ledge, it would work. Now, when he first did it, Stephen didn't jump and it didn't work, and then he showed it off again and he sort of jumped and did it. And they sort of explained that you're probably going to be fine jumping across gaps, but going up, you know, might not work. I don't know what the intent is there, but it looked fine. It was pretty cool. They then also show off forms, which are basically stances from World of Warcraft, if you're familiar with that. These are permanent. When you pick one, you are in it until you unselect it or you pick another one. And there were 3. There was Ferocity, which basically, as you build up your combat momentum, it's going to give you attack speed, and your ability speeds also go up. There was Celerity, which basically increases your speed when you move as you build momentum. And there was Fluidity, which gives you more resistances to crowd control effects. There is then, I want to say, an ultimate version of this, but it wasn't really an ultimate version. It was just sort of like a version called Exert, which you have until it runs out. Basically, it consumes your momentum and you get various buffs while you have it up. By default, I think it increases your attack speed, your movement, and the CC immunity. So it's sort of like a combination of all of the forms, but you can sort of spec it to be having different things. So one of them might be that it breaks the CC if you're currently CC'd. However, it was broken in the video and didn't work. And they sort of built it up in the stream only for it to not look that visually impressive. I think it's going to be very important when you play the game, but visually it's just not as cool as the other things, which is fine. You know, it makes sense. I don't know if it needs to be that cool. I don't think it does. They then went into some big depths about the weapon trees. Now, in this video, he's using a greatsword, a two-handed greatsword. And whilst the weapon tree was revamped, and it's definitely not finalized, if I'm honest, I found this section a little bit boring. It was a little bit more, you know, somebody analyzing something in great depth rather than entertainment, which is fine. These aren't necessarily entertainment pieces, but it just wasn't that interesting to watch. Sounds a bit harsh. I'm sure the abilities and everything look cool. The idea of a weapon tree is pretty nice. I liked it in New World. I like it here. You level up your weapon. That weapon then lets you do other stuff with it, be it adding to combos, basic attacks with extra stuff, that kind of vibe, and I like it. It just wasn't that visually appealing, and the visual of the talent tree didn't look that interesting. But it's an alpha, it's work in progress. Don't get too hung up on it. Extra stuff that they sort of showed off throughout the video. They had destructible assets, which I hadn't seen before in Ashes of Creation. Basically, there were these tents that they were knocking down, and Steven spoke about how you might want to like go ahead and knock these down if you're going to plan for like a PvP in an area, which is cool and all. But, you know, I don't necessarily think it'll impact the game that much. Hopefully it doesn't cost too much performance-wise, because I don't know if we're really going to add that much either, but we'll see. I could easily be wrong. They did reiterate how they're going to be working on the performance in the next couple of months, and that's actually in a couple of different things. One, they're going to try and improve the visuals with the lighting. 2, they're going to be working on the networking. And they did mention how in some places the FPS was pretty rough. Like, you could see the stutter at times. And there was only like 5 people on screen and then a handful of mobs, and the game wasn't like smooth 60 or anything like that. Now, don't get too hung up on that. Typically, in games, you actually work on performance just before it releases. You finish coding your game, getting all the features in, and then you work on performance. Because of the nature of Ashes of Creation, the way we're having Alpha 2 and all that kind of stuff, performance is something they're going to have to work on, and it's planned, right? So you can be concerned if you like, but being concerned over performance in an alpha, I don't know if it really has that strong of a merit. I don't think it's that important. Obviously, the game ended up releasing like that, Sure, we'll complain, might make sense. Overall though, I think they pretty much perfected the fighter. I really liked pretty much everything that they showed. All the abilities look cool. They're all pretty standard, but they just looked amazing. The fighter, I think, is a classic class, if you will. It's one that a lot of people like, a lot of people want to play it. If I'm honest, it's probably my favorite as well. And I said earlier that they needed to nail it. Do you know what? I think they nailed it. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. Big shout out to my Patreons. That's really the best way of supporting me if that's something you want to do. And you can come and talk to me about this or anything on Twitch. Yeah, I'm playing New World. I get it. I know, dead game, whatever. We have fun, right? To be fair, New World's just there whilst I talk about anything and everything. For now, have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.